The second way to get a president out of office is through the 25th Amendment. The 25th Amendment was passed in 1967 in reaction to two events. Eisenhower in 1955 had a very serious heart attack and just couldn't conduct the affairs of the office. But there was no 25th Amendment, and also the Kennedy assassination in '63. So in 1967 they passed the 25th Amendment. Article 4, check it out, 25th Amendment, Article 4.
Score your argument with information from class, your textbook, PowerPoint slides, or posted readings.
Section 4 of the 24th Amendment, 25th Amendment. Do you have it? It explains how presidents can be removed from office if they become disabled and cannot fulfill their official responsibilities. So it's very complicated. I'll try to summarize it for you. Here's how it works. Section 4 requires the Vice President and a majority of either the President's cabinet or, and this is what it says, of such other body that Congress may by law provide to submit to Congress as a whole a written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of the presidency. Vice President, the cabinet, or if not the cabinet, the special body established by Congress have to send to Congress this declaration that the President is disabled. Now, disablement can either be physical or mental, right? And a two-thirds vote of both the House and the Senate is required to remove the president who's physically or mentally or both disabled from office. Okay? Now, which president, long before 1967, caused the biggest controversy of being unable to fulfill the office?
Wilson.
You remember the background for that? Give me some background.
He, 1920, he had a major stroke.
Well, so the war is over and they want to have a peace treaty in Paris, France, in the Versailles Palace.
Yeah.
The United States had only, I don't know if you remember, the United States had only been in World War I for a very short period of time, didn't lose that many troops. Of course, European countries were decimated by World War I. So they wanted to get their revenge against Germany. But Lincoln, who was, Woodrow Wilson was this idealist who wanted to, let's be lenient on the Germans and try to establish a new international organization called the League of Nations, and we'll try to establish peace in our time and forever. So instead of fighting on the battlefields, we'll try to solve all international problems in this League of Nations. And he gets the European powers to agree. But in order for the United States to join the League of Nations, the Senate has to ratify all treaties. And the United States was very hesitant of giving any sovereignty over to this League of Nations. Plus the fact that the Senate had a Republican majority and Wilson was a Democrat. So he comes back to the United States as a hero, assuming that the Senate will simply go along. I mean, if he could convince the English and the French and the Belgium to go easy on the Germans and establish this League of Nations, surely his own compatriots in America would do that. But they won't. He's exhausted. He's an old man. He's exhausted from all his work in Europe. And he decides to make an end run against the Republicans in the Senate by touring the country, trying to convince the American people to force their Republican representatives in the U.S. Senate to vote in favor of the Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations. Remember, the Senate has the power under Article 1 of the Constitution to ratify all treaties. He comes back to the country exhausted, and now he's making what they used to call whistle-stop tours, stopping at every train stop, making impassioned speeches. He gets out west and suffers this terrible, terrible stroke. The right side of his body couldn't move. They take him back to Washington. Well, if you're in the best of physical and mental health, being a president is a very difficult job, as our buddy Trump is finding out. You know how Trump is feeling now. Why the hell did I do this? I was one of the richest people in the world. I had a beautiful wife and all these mistresses. What the hell did I need to be president? Well, it's too late. But this guy is incapacitated. In an attempt to protect him, his wife, Edith, keeps his stroke secret from the press and from the American people and from the international media. And for a whole year, she effectively runs the country, signing in his name all documents and making all decisions. So in fact, we did have a woman president, Edith Wilson, from 1919 to 1920. So this 25th Amendment was passed to cover these kinds of events, like Wilson in 1920, Eisenhower in 1955, and had Kennedy remained alive after being shot in the head in 1963. All right? So now let's see how this affects Trump. Could he be impeached? Through the process, we went through the process of impeachment. Do you think he could be impeached? Did he commit, has he committed, will he commit?
If they find out he's actually made the bold-faced lies that they think he has, it's possible.
Involving what?
Russia?
Yeah, that's it. If it turns out, yeah, if it turns out that he entered into an agreement with Russia, that together they would undercut the Clinton candidacy. That's treason. It's subverting a country. It's subverting the democratic process. So that's it.
I mean, what about the amount of people that worked for him that were also foreign agents?
Well, the question is, did he know about it? Yeah, that's it.
I don't.
They call that the. Remember with Nixon, the smoking gun?
Yeah.
Was he part of this conspiracy? If they could prove that, then he's
I
gone.
don't know if he thought of it, but he probably was complicit at least in it.
If they can prove it.
They
There would have to be hearings, just like they had for Nixon. Now, with Nixon, you had courageous Republicans who saw what Nixon was doing and were willing to vote against him. Do we have courageous Republicans nowadays? I mean that's, but if it happens under impeachment, it would have to happen by proving his.
Lindsey Graham's stepping up a little bit.
Well, it's not just courageous Republicans. It's also like them thinking like, is Mike Pence better for the Republican brand than Trump is?
Well, it may be true.
Which would be like, which would motivate them.
It may be true. That's a very good point. So that's what if they could show this connection to Russia. We know that Russia was tampering with the election. So now the question becomes, was Trump involved with that directly?
What about all him refusing to release things? Like the White House
Well,
refused to release this paperwork that they're asking for.
Yeah, It's mostly his tax returns.
It's the tax returns, but it's also stuff about source with the NSA stuff.
Why is, what is the connection between Russia and the tax returns?
They're trying to see if he makes any profit directly from this connection.
Or if they lent him money?
Yeah, because the Deutsche Banks, whatever that is, that was.
That's German, yeah.
That was major money laundering stuff with that.
Well, that's what it's all about. And again, people are thinking the fix is in. That you could see through these tax returns that that he was in league with Russia in many ways. You know, the enormously rich people never use their own money. I guess you know that, right? Ever.
I have a group of friends.
That's how they become rich.
So, non-medicine major friends.
Is hate speech a different topic, or does hate speech apply to Trump in any possible way that he?
Well, let's see. That's an excellent question.
Because I think that was on the bill for discussion
Yeah,
today.
we could do that too, but it's connected. Here's the point. So what is the most mentally? What is the charge of that Trump suffers from? What mental disorder?
Narcissism?
It is narcissism.
Well, narcissism is a trait. It's narcissistic personality disorder that you have to be diagnosed with. Because you can be narcissistic and sitting in this room.
Yeah, but it's
But
at an extreme, it's a mental disorder. So
Yeah.
so here's what I figured out. The American Psychiatric Association, not psychological, but psychiatric, established a description of narcissism as a mental disorder. This is what it says. It constitutes a mental disorder in which people have an inflated sense of their own importance. Check. As well as a deep need for admiration, a lack of empathy for others, and behind the mask of this ultra confidence lies a fragile self-esteem that's vulnerable to the slightest criticism. And there it is. So that's as a mental disorder, not just as a kind of, you know,
Right.
yeah. How do you like that? Now, why is it dangerous to have a narcissist, a certified narcissist, as the president of the United States? And you'll see why.
Because they'll make decisions not based on what's good, but for what makes them look good.
The Chinese are making a personal attack against me. So instead of serving the public interest, they're serving self-interest.
Well, with Nixon, a lot of people talk about him being like very narcissistic. It's like when you look at the McGovern election, like what motivated him to commit a crime.
That's paranoia.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But that's what led to it was that they're going to come after me like I'm the best and I'm winning and like.
You see, her point is well taken. In order to become a president of the United States or the CEO of Exxon, there has to be some sense that you're a very important person to begin with. The question is, where does it cross into, you know...
Our political system in general is going to attract sociopaths and it's going to attract narcissists. It's just the way it's set up, the level of and you can say the same thing for high-powered business positions and lawyers
exactly,
as well.
exactly.
Because you have to be willing to do anything to get to
Exactly, exactly. But apparently, according to the American Psychiatric, so it crosses a line somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's the answer. Now, to make matters worse, so what happened? Let me again. You have to back this. All this stuff is so complicated. The same Goldwater who told Nixon you didn't stand a chance and you're going to be impeached by the House and you're going to 2/3 of the Senate are going to vote against you because the evidence is so clear against what you did. Ran for president in 1964. And he was as right-wing, as extreme, radical right-wing as you could imagine. So his campaign included a promise. It wasn't really a promise. He kept implying it. that if this was in the middle of the Vietnam War, he would drop nuclear weapons on North Vietnam. That was the implication. So psychiatrists said he must be nuts. Who wants to use nuclear weapons in any case, but on North Vietnam? So he must be nuts. So the American Psychiatric Association, APA, got angry, and they said, number one, how could a professional psychiatrist diagnose somebody from afar, right? Number two, if that was your private patient, then medical ethics don't allow you to share your diagnosis with the public. So for those two reasons, the American Psychiatric Association in 1964 established what they called the Goldwater rule, which says that it's unprofessional for psychiatrists to diagnose politicians.
Wasn't that handy?
Have you ever heard about the Goldwater rule?
No, but how convenient.
Well, but it makes some sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, to a point.
Now, 100 psychiatrists met at Yale recently and said that Trump should be thrown out according to the 25th Amendment because he was clearly had this mental disorder and he was going to react personally rather than in the public interest of the United States. So they were willing, so when people said to him, well, aren't you violating professional ethics through the Goldwater rule, they said, being a good citizen trumps following the rules of the APA.
Well, there's times where they can violate their confidentiality if they feel like the patient or the public are in danger.
Sure. But this isn't confidentiality, they don't know him.
Right.
Except for what
So
they
there's,
see on TV, which is bad enough.
But you have to wonder how much of his persona is that, just that.
Is a
persona.
character. I was
It's a
about to
character
say-
that's playing. Because he's a character of himself. most of the time.
Right.
He is who anyone wants him to be, which is also one of those tribal narcissist characteristics. Of who do you need me to be, I'll be it.
Well, they talk about him being Alzheimer's, like having Alzheimer's and stuff like that.
Whoa, I haven't heard of that.
But it's, well, he's like all in like, when you start following his like trains of thought and stuff, especially when if you ever tried to read a transcription of like a conversation of his,
I haven't heard him mention
you won't follow it. You won't follow.
I haven't heard him mention as much as I've heard
I don't think he has it. So
I wonder though, like how much, like she said, that is something that like comes to my mind is like people are like, well, he's insane, he needs to be removed from office. I'm like, how much of that is just him like playing to the crowd and just.
So listen to this. So a letter to the editor comes to the New York Times. You can read it for yourself. From a guy from Duke University who wrote the diagnosis for the psychiatric diagnosis as narcissism. He says in this letter, I just want you to know, I was the one who was established to write the standards for narcissism as a mental disorder. And he says, it's clear that the APA told this guy to write the letter. And this is what he says, read it for yourself. He says, as the author of those standards, I can tell you that Trump is not a narcissist. And then he goes on to say, as a matter of fact, he gives mentally disturbed people a bad name. Isn't that something? But it was clear that he was set up, you know, to put their foot down. But when he said he gives mentally disturbed people a bad name, I just thought that was the greatest line I ever read.
What's it? Do you remember his name?
I can't just say New York Times letter to the editor about Trump's narcissism. Read it for yourself. Read it. It's wonderful. But it was a setup. This is another fix. You know, they wanted.
His name is Alan Francis.
That's it.
Alan Francis.
Read the letter. Go ahead. Read it out loud.
Favored media speculation about Donald Trump's psychological motivations and psychiatric diagnosis has recently encouraged mental health professionals to disregard the usual ethical constraints.
Go
Blah,
slower
blah,
so they
blah,
can hear.
blah.
Go slow.
Very good. I was listening. Has recently encouraged mental health professionals to disregard the usual ethical constraints against diagnosing public figures at a distance.
That's the Goldwater rule, yes.
They have sponsored several petitions and a February 14th letter to the New York Times suggesting that Mr. Trump is incapable on psychiatric grounds of serving as president. Most amateur diagnosticians have mislabeled President Trump with a diagnosis of a narcissistic personality disorder. I wrote the criteria that define this disorder, and Mr. Trump doesn't meet them.
There you go.
He may be a world-class narcissist, but this doesn't make him mentally ill, because he does not suffer from the distress and impairment required to diagnose mental disorder. Mr. Trump causes severe distress rather than experiencing it, and has been richly
Did you hear that? Stop. He causes distress rather than experiencing it. Go ahead.
And has been richly rewarded rather than punished for his grandiosity, self-absorption, and lack of empathy.
There it is.
It is a stigmatizing insult to the mentally ill, who are mostly well-behaved and well-meaning, to be lumped with Mr. Trump, who is neither.
Isn't that amazing?
Bad behavior is rarely a sign of mental illness, and the mentally ill behave badly only rarely. Psychiatric name-calling is a misguided way of countering Mr. Trump's attack on democracy. He can and should be appropriately denounced for his ignorance, incompetence, impulsivity, and pursuit of dictatorial power.
That's something.
His psychological motivations are too obvious to be interesting. That's the persona idea, I think. And analyzing them will not halt his headlong power grab. The antidote to a dystopic Trumpian dark age is political, not psychological.
Say that one more time.
The antidote to a dystopic Trumpian dark age is political, not psychological.
Now, that's a great letter, isn't it? I think the fix is in. He's doing this, but I think citizenship trumps following medical ethics. I think he's wrong. Everything in that definition, which we quoted. Let's do
that
it.
is who he is.
Let's do it one more time. Inflated sense of their importance. Everything is the greatest. Remember, it's the greatest, right? Deep need for admiration. Lack of empathy for others. Did you hear? Remember, my favorite politician is Elizabeth Warren. He keeps calling her Pocahontas. Did you hear that?
No.
He spoke to the NRA yesterday.
Yeah, he's worried about her.
He's very worried about her.
Well, he's worried about Frederick Douglass too. So he's getting more and more attention. Frederick Douglass. He's huge.
Lack of empathy for others. The horrible names.
Yeah.
He calls people, especially women. Who was that woman, that former head of Hewlett Packard?
Carly Fiorina.
Yeah. Carly.
He's called her ugly on the campaign. So she went on Today's Show the next day, and what did she say? Do you remember? She said, she's criticizing me for all the wrinkles I have in my face. And I just want to tell him I earned all those wrinkles running against a dirtbag like him.
Yeah.
That's what she said.
So is any of the stuff he really says, though, hate speech? That was my question
No.
coming here.
It's just the manifestation of a mental disorder. That's what I think. This guy, I love the letter, and he's obviously a great writer, but I think the guy's wrong.
My concern is that one of the things that we talk about and we teach to our Psych 120 kids, and I'm sure they teach in abnormal, is that there's really like the 4 Ds of disorders. There's the distress, and the distress can either be caused to yourself or to others, but it's both usually.
He never goes to sleep.
Right, like he never sleeps, which is
That's
insomnia in a sense, but
That's
that
right.
also could just be because he's manic all the time. He's like hyper big up. But that also could be cocaine from, the 80s.
All of a sudden, he suffers from Alzheimer's. He's a cocaine.
Well, yeah, no, I
Yeah.
mean, but still,
Yeah.
And there's also the danger aspect of it, which it can be danger to yourself or danger to others, but that's not always present no matter what.
And then dysfunction.
Dysfunction and distress. So distress, dysfunction. What is this?
Dysfunction, danger, and
It deviates. It
Deviates.
deviates from norm. Duh. I remember. I'm not teaching right now, so I don't
Well,
have
in the
slides.
whole history of American elections, presidential election, nobody has ever acted like. Nobody has ever called
this
people
is in
personal
there,
names.
definitely.
no, that's
Never. But what's interesting, all of this is interesting, and it's all complicated, and there's no easy answers to any of this stuff, is one of the things I'm trying. Remember, the questions are much more important than the answers. But only the American Psychiatric Association has a Goldwater rule. The American Psychological Association does not, nor does the American Medical Association
Right.
have anything like a Goldwater rule. So those two associations also believe that in certain instances, it's important for doctors and psychologists to speak out for the public interest. That being a good citizen is more important than even being a professional psychologist or doctor.